Hello, everyone. It's Christine Marie Mason, your host for the Rose Woman podcast on love and liberation. It's also sort of part of Rosebud Woman, the letters I write each week on love, power, and womanhood. And it's part of the work of Radiant Farms, psychoactive supplements to help you step into better mental health through the power of plants. I was going to release this week an episode on manifestation, and that's just going to have to wait. There's so many things that are stacked up, and it's been such a long time since I've done a solo episode, and I've been all around the world meeting and speaking with incredible people that I've decided to do a little catch-up combo with me, and I hope you'll enjoy some of these topics. I was in Malibu, and I went by this shop, and on the sign of the shop it said, "You have only two choices when faced with any situation: evolve or repeat." So I think we're most of us making a commitment to try to evolve when faced with challenging situations in our lives and not get stuck in these repeat cycles. And I've increasingly come to believe that the entire job of healing the world, which is even that is not a great term, healing or bringing back into wholeness, but that the main job for almost all separation is for each of us individually to learn to hold more and more of our own experience without blaming, shaming, or spewing on other people, particularly in the face of triggers. As I look back over my work over a long time, whether that's the 5 years training with Thomas Hubel in collective trauma, where it was increasingly about noticing like when someone said something or when you had a feeling that you wanted to push away, or it either like made you lean out of your center to try to respond to that person or contract away and push it away, or when you just couldn't actually drop in and feel and allow your sensation to pass through you, how up-leveled the nervous system would get, and how it was in those moments that conflict would arise. It was also evident when I was doing this stuff in the prisons with shock. Every time I went in, you would see that it was people's accumulated trauma, their early triggers, unprocessed stuff that would hit against an incoming signal, and then they would freak out. They would have a disproportionate response. In fact, one of the signs that you're looking in yourself at an unprocessed trigger or a trauma response is how fast you respond to something that someone else says or does. If it's 0 to 60, or if it's a super intense and disproportionate response, it's pretty certain that you're responding not from this moment right now, but that you're responding from something that's quite ancient. So, over time, I've come to believe that this ability to hold more and more of our experience in ourselves, centered and deep, like that, is at the heart of healing separation and of healing the violence that's in our world. So I was speaking with a new friend, Ben Bowler, who's the founder of Unity.Earth. He runs a lot of big programs like the World Peace Day, which is coming up in September, and Unity Week and other things like that, to try to bring attention to this deep undercurrent in culture of people who are just sort of fed up with violence, with our resources being used to harm and even kill people and damage homes and hospitals and schools, that we're just kind of fed up with the barbaric ways of war. And then we can do so much better in creating a world that is loving and whole. And so as we're speaking, I was reflecting on my time in living in community at Sundari, the project we have in the Big Island, and how we came in and started that project with such high hopes and ideals and big concepts, and that there were a lot of joyful experiences and moments that came out of holding those ideals. We would have a lot of joint celebration, joint work, joint grief processing. We had meals together. We cared for each other in times of illness, cared for the community in times of suffering. We would sort of do devotional practices together, movement practices together, and all that was great. But that the conflicts that would arise were often based on very small things, like cleanliness in the kitchen, or sound politeness, or sleeping and waking times, or food issues. They were very rarely major personal issues, but that people would have these moments of like, you left your laundry in the dryer, and they wouldn't take it as just like a discourtesy. It would actually be interpreted as a sign of disrespect. So one of the first things that we were talking about in terms of creating world peace is that it really requires us to create micropeace. And micropeace is kind of a word that I'd like us all to play with. Like, what would it mean to go through any given day and to stay in peace inside of yourself, to not make anybody wrong, to not let your preferences that arise, if your preferences arrive, to notice whether they're like driven out of joy and a creative invitation to something cool, or if they're driven out of fear or irritation or a sense of your way is the only way. To notice when judgment arises of other people and how they behave. And just like all through the day, how often we're making others or the world wrong. What I found in myself when I started to notice my own judgments and when I would make others wrong, it was often related to the things that I couldn't hold in my own being. So in this practice, I did a little bit of writing on it that I want to share with you. MicroPeace plays a crucial role in promoting peaceful interactions at the global scale. We become peaceful inside in the face of everyday situations and triggers when we practice micropeace. We bring awareness to daily moments and we catch ourselves when we're disturbed or judgment arises. And we learn not to make meaning from others' actions. Instead, we stay with our own experience. We seek to understand the other's experience with empathy. And we realize that people's different experiences, perspectives, and their unconscious biases can create misunderstandings and triggers in us. And we also recognize when our response is an echo of something that we have yet to resolve in ourselves. So when we practice micropeace and we have intent to hold more of our own feelings, we have a greater capacity to feel our own selves and like not say it's your fault that I'm feeling this way, but to feel our own selves without throwing it out on someone else. Then we move into a space where we say, peace is my ambient field, my inner atmosphere. Peace is a mood of being. This doesn't mean that we're inactive. We can act in the world and address injustice or build our businesses or run our families from a place of peace. We can act for change, but that we initiate and respond to everything that's arising from and with an inner peace. And in fact, we know in this world of micropeace that that's the only vibration that will heal. So I created a little acronym for peace: practice, empathize, allow, contain, examine. P, practice mindfulness and awareness. Notice when your peace is disturbed and choose peace in response. E, empathize, be curious to understand different positions. Try to take out whatever assumptions we have and seek to understand the other. Allow different perspectives without making anything wrong. And I'm going to speak more on no make wrong in a minute. Contain your discomfort internally. Hold your discomfort or your perceived insult internally rather than projecting it outward. Don't spew on other people. And then examine others' behaviors as reflections of ourselves. So, there's a principle in the healing world that says everything out there actually exists in you. So, for example, I've done this practice with people on various difficult topics like gun violence. And so you say, okay, well, how does gun violence live inside of me? And, it's not so much that you're like, I'm also a violent person, or I can really feel into the joy of shooting a gun. What it's more like is that all of the perceptions and understandings that you have had of gun violence have arrived into your eyes and ears and perceptions in different ways, and that each person holds a unique story and understanding about gun violence in their own system. And that before we even begin working to address that situation, it's really helpful to know ourselves, how it lives in us and how those opinions have been formed, that time when you wept around a school shooting, or that time when you heard that someone was at a movie theater and they were panicked and running in the dark, or, the time when you saw a news clip with someone like toting an AK-47 into a Walmart because they can and scaring the child as they walk by. Everyone has different stories of how that lives inside of them. Similarly, we did one of these on abortion, like how does abortion live inside of you? And I think there were about 25 people who were in that particular meeting. And we were very surprised as we went around the room to hear from, first in triads, like sitting in triads so that you could examine over a period of time your own relationship to how does abortion live in you, like what you heard when you were a teenager, when the whole like right-wing push that completely mischaracterizes the state of abortion began to happen as a political act, as a political identity to get people to attach to so that they could win elections. That whole thing, how that lives in you, or how abortion lives in you because you had one, or because your girlfriend had one, or you had a baby that was going to die inside of you and you had to have a late-term procedure, or your fear around it, or whatever, or your resentment. There was a man in that group who was like so resentful that his girlfriend decided not to proceed with a pregnancy that had his genetics in it, that he was, the other co-creator of, but that she didn't want to host his child in her belly. So that was really an intense process, but only after we dug in and discovered what was in people, what was alive in people, could we then begin a conversation around what a correct response might be, or how to hold each other going forward in these difficult cultural and very personal points around things like gun rights and abortion. So in the MakeWrong, in the finding MicroPeace and being curious and empathizing, I've been highly influenced by Patrick Connor, who I did an episode with not that long ago. And he has invited us to do a 30 days of no make wrong practice, where we hold the intention to not make anything or anyone wrong, including ourselves, as part of a sort of sacred container. And I want to tell you, if you can get through one day, you're doing better than almost everyone who's in the practice group, because it's constant. We're always judging. And he invites this. I'm going to read a little quote from him. Be willing to not make anything wrong that arises. Whatever arises about anyone or anything else, keep it in the confines of your own consciousness and commit to not make anyone wrong, no matter how close the trigger is. Say instead, how perfect that this is arising. Show me the source of it. Let it be completely transformed and unwound in myself. And then he invites us to bless all parts of our experience, even those that seem difficult or challenging, thereby transforming the experience and disempowering any capacity that it might have had to do harm. So he says, when we maintain a state of awareness and compassion, and we do see every trigger or difficult situation as an opportunity for deeper understanding and healing, rather than a reason to blame or criticize, then we invite an open and miraculous approach to life. We step into a consciousness where we are the creator and not the victim of our experience. And we also purge all make wrong in the multidimensional field, which is crucial for our personal transformation and for the clearing of any karmic blocks. So it's an intense invitation, particularly at a time when there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of crazy, crazy things in the political sphere, or so it seems from the news. Maybe that's a difficult invitation. So what we're saying isn't that you don't advocate for your beliefs or your position. What we're saying is you do it with an understanding that the other person is creating their opinions and actions based on their own deeply seated beliefs and opinions, and that even if you find them distasteful, that if you come into it with a perspective of deep inner peace and not fear and not anxiety and not blaming, but with like a centeredness, that you will be incredibly effective. Another core teaching is that the content of your conversation is almost less important than the vibration or the frequency that you're giving off while you're speaking or being present in the room. So that's a pretty potent realization. Like your vibration is your message. Your transmission is your offering. Your presence is your offering, how you show up. So if you're showing up in a field of unconditional love, acceptance, curiosity, even when the other person's like incredibly triggered and, annoying at first pass, like something changes. Like they feel it, you feel it. It's pretty amazing. So that being said, I want to move on from that MicroPeace and no MakeWrong into some things that have been happening in my personal life and in my professional life that kind of pick up on these threads. The first one is, I had Nicole Dedone on the podcast last week, and I have gotten a lot of messages around having her on as a guest. Most of them, like 80% of them, like, wow, this is an amazing episode. A lot more people have passed it on to their friends than many of the other episodes, which is nice. But I've also gotten a few people who are like, how could you have someone on who's done this to women? You're no longer a safe place for women. What are you talking about? First of all, you can't be made unsafe from ideas. And second of all, I did quite a lot of research on what was going on before extending the platform to Nicole. And I also read all of her books. And, I'm not a lazy reader. And I feel a little bit like defending myself here. I am getting a PhD in philosophy and consciousness, which means I've had, not only my own education, 20 to 30 years of training in the material, and now 3 years of coursework working on the thesis. But that when I read her work, the Arrow Sutras, I found it to be one of the most compelling contemporary philosophy pieces out there. So yeah, I thought she was a great guest, and the conversation was great. And then I went back and I looked at what she'd been accused of doing. And there's a guy named Frank Parlato, who's an investigative journalist. He has a thing called the Frank Report. And originally he came out sort of pulling on the thread of, NXIVM-like sex cult. But his understanding now, after all of the incredible cancel culture and attack that she's been under, is that there are no valid charges. The best that the federal government could come up with in charging Nicole and her partner, Rachel Cherwitz. And Rachel, by the way, they originally approached to be a witness, and she said, there's nothing to witness. She didn't do anything wrong. And then they charged her too. Was one count of conspiracy to commit labor fraud, not even committing labor fraud. They couldn't even find an example of that. So, and there's nothing sexual, although she is getting tainted with the war on sex smut wand. So we made the decision to go ahead and feature her. So to the people who are like, oh, this person's damaging, you cannot be harmed by an idea. And there's a lot of good in what she has to say. And you might as well explore it. You don't have to be an advocate for her, but there are a lot of people that she really helped and is helping to heal and bring into more inner potency and inner capacity to uplift others. So that's one. And then the other one is related to a situation over the last couple of years where I stood up for someone who was accused of a crime, a violent crime. And because I stood up for him, I was implicated in the canceling of him also. And that's been a really difficult process to watch, like 8 years of my deep work and support in a community be unwound by one person's attempt to harm and misrepresent me and all of the people in our community. So, I have a pretty well developed sense of intuition. I'm approaching 60. I've got a lot of kids and I've been through a lot. And I've done a lot of training in this sort of like intuitive ability to feel into what's real and what's going on. And I knew that this woman's perceptions and her agenda wasn't quite resonating in my body. I knew that there was something off. And so I invited a sacred pause of their participation in anything in our community. And it took off like very difficult time for me. It ended up that she created fake accounts online to attack me and my community. And then when she didn't get her way that way, then she went and filed a complaint against us with the county, with the zoning board. And that, of course, has created both a tremendous amount of opportunity to collaborate with the Hawaii County and also like a sense of, wow, there are really a lot of people out there who believe that if they can't have it their way, then no one else should have it either. And that her self-centered punitive action not only put everybody else's enjoyment at risk and the whole investment that the community's made over building our place for the last 8 years, but it really is a pointer to like the asynchronous power of one unhealed person So my practice in dealing with the kind of people who are picking, canceling, trying to use the power of public perception to bring others down is to go inside of myself and find that core peace. And like really try to be in the empathy and then drop even deeper into the feeling that there's nothing that can harm my soul. Then from that place of like a little bit of joyful sparkle, like, oh, wow, that was pretty crazy. Wow, now what do we do? If there's one power and not two powers, as my meditation goes, then that means everything is working for my soul's evolution. And what in here is for my soul's evolution? And what I got from that, those two instances, were I'm in a position where I can walk the line of fairness, justice, getting the full facts on the table before making a judgment, which is I can be a movement in the world toward patience and nuance and fairness, which I intend to keep doing. I can also be more clear. I learned in the process in the second story, how I can be more clear when I first get the hit on someone and be like, this isn't safe for me or someone else, which many years even before this situation arose, I knew that this young woman had a problem with her perceptual field and her accurate perception of things that was often turning a victim story, even in smaller interactions that were uncomfortable. But I didn't listen to that voice because it would have created a need for me to intervene. And I was conflict avoidant. So when you're conflict avoidant, then the stakes keep getting higher until you deal with what's in front of you. So for my soul's evolution, to notice now when I'm becoming conflict avoidant, when I have the intuition, I have the hit, I know what I need to do, but I don't act on it because it would cause too much stress to act on it at that particular time. Like I don't want to deal with it, so I sweep it under the rug. So that's been one of the silver linings over the last year and a half, is looking at where my intuition says there's something here that's not kosher and then dealing with it right away. And it's made me more brave. I can give you a couple of examples of how that bravery has shown up. Like I had an interaction with a man who was acting like friendly, but I had the feeling underneath it there was like a sexual tension and, a mutual attraction, but like an expectation that if he came to visit me, that there would be some kind of intimate activity. And I also know that I love myself very much right now, and that my longing in the world is for a deep, spirit-centered partnership, like a guy who puts divinity first at the center of his life, and that together we can act out of that joyful, effulgent, radiant, mystical place and have each other's back in private, and then in public weave into hosting and cooking for people and doing activist work and making beautiful things and living in the beauty way and being like the backbone of multiple communities around the world, and like just really having a delicious, playful, co-developed life. And that I'm not really interested in fragmenting my energy away from that intention with people who are not in a position to reciprocate. And that means if you're married, we are not doing anything like that. No, that's not against anybody who's in the polyamorous situation or who has agreements. It's just not where I'm at. I'm not making them wrong. It's just I'm making myself, like someone told me once, that boundaries are the place where self-love meets other love. And that once you are firmly established in yourself, you won't even need the boundary because you'll just know. It won't have to be an externally enforced thing. And so as I'm learning how to address situations early as they arise, I addressed this one like the same day. And it diffused it completely. It was such a beautiful movement. And I'm noticing like, oh, if I have a little resentment that's arising with a friend, then if I just message them and I say, this is what I'm noticing. This is how I feel. Is this an accurate experience for you? Or could we reflect on it together? And that it almost always, like even the moment of articulating it, clears it out. So to be an impeccable and precise investigator of where I am holding others in judgment or criticism or making them wrong, or where I'm getting myself all riled up because I'm projecting onto someone else some story inside of my head. And in that impeccability and willingness to look, I am finding a tremendous amount of freedom. So I want to go back to MicroPeace and Ben, because there is this International Day of Peace coming up September 21st. And it's about a 3-month wind up to this day. And I think we can do together a daily MicroPeace practice, or a moment every day to be peace. Because if we can do that in ourselves, then there might be a possibility that it can roll up to our greater systems. And there's so much divisiveness right now that's portrayed in the media. And we know that, there's the rural-urban split in America. There's the, blue-red divide in so many ways. But in reality, everything's purple. Like every state is purple, every county is purple. It's always a blend. And even inside of each person, most of us have some beliefs that straddle the core beliefs of both parties in that binary system anyway. At least the old parties. I don't know what now. Now it all seems bananas. But I want to say that, I've been all around the world in the last year and a half, also like in multiple continents and many, many countries within those continents, and environments ranging from business to music to consciousness to just general public things. And everywhere I've gone, I've encountered nothing but kind, loving, joyful, helpful people, and most of whom cannot believe that we're still in these global cultures of warfare and genocide and violence. That's what I'd like to magnify and elevate between now and Peace Day, which would be a wonderful thing if you'd want to join in on. So MicroPeace practice every day. I will put a link in the show notes to how you can join me on that. I think we're going to do it from the Unity platform, not from my personal account. And there'll be many, many other consciousness leaders and speakers who will be including their moment of peace, internal peace cultivation in that practice. So super, super excited to be part of that and sharing that and helping to co-create that. So another thing that I want to talk about in this ranty show of What's Up with Christine is I recently took on a board position with an organization called The Mission Within. I'll read you their bio, actually. The Mission Within Foundation is a nonprofit that is dedicated to creating a future free of veteran suicides and empowering veterans and their families to find purpose and healing and growth through community. And it's successfully provided PTSD treatment for thousands of veterans since its founding in 2017, both veterans and special ops and their spouses, as well as personalized coaching. And most of the work that they do is through ibogaine, which is a derivative of iboga, a medicinal that's considered a psychedelic medicine. So these transformational psychedelics in PTSD, like psilocybin, like MDMA, are not always legal in the United States, but the data behind them is amazing. So while our friends are working through regulatory channels at the FDA to try to get these things approved, which of course are hitting all kinds of ossified and calcified structures and opposition from people who prefer that you don't get immediate healing from your PTSD, but you get stuck in a long loop of pharmaceuticals, or who aren't aware of the data or who don't understand what happens when you take a psychedelic, it's meeting a lot of opposition. But the Mission Within, as well as other Wounded Warrior and other programs that are really targeting helping those who have gone to war, it's got an urgency to it. So I have consented to take that board seat on, and I encourage you, if you have anyone who is in your family or friend circle who's had an experience at war that's left them traumatized, or with a traumatic brain injury, that you look at ibogaine treatment and find out more about the Mission Within Foundation, because they're actively working to change the narrative around psychedelic treatment for veterans, and they're partnering with universities and scientists and medical professionals around the world to bring scientific rigor to the sacred space of psychedelic medicine. There are other medicines that they work with, like 5-MeO-DMT and psilocybin, and making them more accessible and legally accessible to veterans and their families, including by working with the VA and other veterans organizations under special provisions to do treatments. So I'm really honored to be joining the board of directors of the Mission Within Foundation. And, I have been a longtime advocate for psychedelic therapy. It's helped me regain my wholeness, and it's helped a lot of others. And I've been deeply inspired by Martine Polanco's commitment, Dr. Martine's commitment to helping veterans and their families find healing and growth and purpose, and go on and, where they can then reach out to everyone else that they touched and who they know are suffering, and pass that on to be a transmission light in the world. So those are some things. MicroPeace, no MakeWrong, that you are a microcosm of the world outside of you, never separate, and that as we examine our own interiority and share that with others, then we step into a new possibility of creating structures that are different than the structures we have now. Check your judgments at the door and make room for fact and nuance. Check your media sources, meet your neighbors, and have real conversations. And when you find yourselves bonding in sort of a low-level trauma response or conspiracy theory, or if that happens to come up, then see if you can feel into where you are acting out of your own unresolved stuff instead of being centered in your potency and power. Are you ready? Let's switch topics and talk about my meeting with Linda Tucker. So you might have heard the shorty episode I did with Linda Tucker, who was the person who saved the white lions from extinction in the wild. And it was a short episode, and it was done in anticipation of a fundraiser that we did in Southern California last week. So this came about because my business partner on Radiant Farms is a devotee of the lions, and of Linda in particular. He's been personally transformed by the work, and he's had a couple of health challenges and needed some support on this. And because I love him, I also would, of course, say yes. And then I noticed that, I've been wearing this lion ring, and on my altar is Durga, who rides on her lion mount, and that the lion symbolism has actually been in my field for a long time. I just never connected it to the white lions. So in the Durga story, the lion that she rides on represents her tamed ego, that she rides on this potent, incredibly forceful being, smiling, holding a lotus flower, holding these symbols of her knowledge and her discipline and her abundance and her nurturing and her power, while she's like really, because she's mastered herself, So anyway, I look at those symbols. I'm like, all right, this is obviously like meant to be. So I'm going to do this fundraiser. But of course, like everything else that happens, when I do meet her, I am shocked and amazed at the synchronicities and the deeper story of her work. And as she's speaking, I realized that her lessons really weren't just about the lions and her particular story, but about having a mission and a dharmic purpose, and then in the face of poachers and mafia and threats and violence and lack of funds and all of these things, persisting in navigating those things and having faith that the thing that you see will win out, and that her lessons were much more in line with the work that I had written about in Bending the Bow than I knew. So she came with a core story of restoring love and respect for nature and each other, and how that's the core mission of the Global White Lion Protection Trust. What would it mean to live with love and respect and reverence in the world? That's also the core of all the stories I investigated in Bending the Bow. From 2016 to 2018, I researched the social movements that sort of made life significantly better in the West. Things like child labor, Indigenous rights, women's rights, gay rights, all of those things, animal rights also, by the way, and then looked at people who were 30 years ahead of the movement becoming mainstream. And all of the stuff that people threw at them, threats and economic collapse and fire and literal violence and reputational damage. And, how did those people stay with their mission was one of my main questions. How did they have the inner resolve to stick with it. And what I learned in the book was that people had an inner process that they went through where they had a direct connection to source, that the mission mattered more to them than their own life, that they really had no fear of death, but that they realized that they might be killed in the process of advocating for these things. They really put a lot of energy into building networks that would help grow and spread the message in the event of their demise. I also learned in that work that nobody did it alone, that the West has sort of this hagiography of the charismatic individual, the front man who is like the unique person who can convince others, but that all of these people actually had 5 to 7 core roles around them that were really similar. They were kind of protectors, uplifters, people who did the networking, and you can find those different roles in my write-ups on that. There's even a free chapter summarizing those roles, I think, on the website. So in Bending the Bow, how great movements start and grow, there was a lot of resonance with what happened with Linda. She was sparked to something and then gradually created a pod around her that would help her drive and grow and move it forward. And she also developed a deep inner spiritual life to withstand the attacks that came her way as she was trying to move the needle on a system that was violent and separatist and disrespectful and unloving. So Global White Lion Protection Trust and my new friend Linda moves us into what I would say is my core work in the world, also the presentation that I just gave in Ibiza at the Holo Movement Conference called Living from Oneness. And in Living from Oneness, I was talking about how there is a simultaneously emerging global conversation, happening in all of these sort of gypset, neo-hippie hotspots around the planet that is syncretic. It draws off of indigenous traditions, mystical traditions, and practices from all over the world to reconnect us to the earth and each other, much like what Patrick teaches, that the whole world is ensouled, that the incarnation is just as valuable and important as the transcendence, and that everything you encounter in daily life is holy, holy. And that return to the earth and the body is sacred is also really deeply in alignment with Rosebud's work, that your body and your particularly ignored parts, that coming into your body and choosing life in your body is part of our collective movement to healing and to a more joyous life and to the restoration of the balance of the masculine and feminine in the world in a healthy way. But that it's also eco-spiritual, that we're returning to the earth and realizing that everything comes from the earth and being more mindful of how we extract or how we work with the earth and keep it in a regenerative frame. So anyway, in preparation for my PhD work, I was researching what these practices are in what I'm calling the Neo-Gaian global movement, restoring our spirituality to earth. And it's quite celebratory. There's a lot of singing, there's a lot of dancing. So I gave the talk and it went off really well. And I concluded with this. You can hear the talk. I think they're posting it this week or something. I concluded with a vision for a true pro-life culture. Vandana Shiva was the first person. Dr. Vandana Shiva was the first person to speak to the reclamation of the phrase pro-life away from the anti-abortion activist people, the anti-women's full health care activist people, and take pro-life back to what it really means: good water, good soil, good food, access to seeds, and respecting life and not killing, not a culture of death, not a culture of thanatos, but an erotic, life-loving culture where everyone gets to live out their lives in full potential, their full creative potential. So the call to a culture, a pro-life culture of reverence and joy, where death and killing are the last thing on your mind, because who knows what beauty that being might create. And then if you're killing to eat, you do it respectfully, not for sport, because life wants itself. And so I want to end on that. Like, in your practice of MicroPeace, can you also invite in yourself a vision of a true pro-life world where all of our systems, economic and otherwise, are designed to support the full unfoldment of each person and their beautiful potential, and that we each ourselves are wired not to act out of fear or contraction, but to create and co-create the most beautiful life possible for ourselves and those around us. All right. I have much more to say, but hopefully you're caught up with me. And I am going to be in St. Louis next week doing a talk on the free period, finding joy in midlife and beyond for the American Academy of Sexuality Educators. And then I will be at an AI and embodiment talk. And then I will be back in Europe at the Festival of Consciousness in Barcelona, presenting on altered states of consciousness through sexuality, and at the Yoga Mela in Sweden, doing devotional song and helping out with some other things there. So that's just a few of the activities that are coming up. If you're enjoying the writing on my Substack, christinemariemason.substack.com, or the stuff that's being serialized at rosewoman.com, please share it with others. I'm really putting my heart and soul into these projects that are all aimed at bringing more understanding and liberation and freedom and joy into everyone's lives. So thank you for supporting the work. And next week we'll be back with guest speakers and all love, all light. Remember who you are, resilient, self-healing organism.